there will be no real non-controlled currency in the world.
We're coming for you, banks.
Bitcoin is punk rock. Deal with it.
You split, we bankrupt you.
Do you use Lightning wallets to pay for things or not?
No.
Bitcoin Cash would be seen as more of a threat to the United States hegemony than Bitcoin.
Miles Town, what's your favorite kind of money?
Bitcoin Cash.
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. This is episode number 47, the UST, or I guess Lunar, Depegging, Cryptocalypse, and Humanitarian Bitcoin featuring Jenny. Today is Sunday, the 15th of May, 2022. I'm your host, Jeremy. Same as always, Jet is doing the producing, and today we have a very special guest, an Aussie expatriate, a Bitcoiner, and obviously humanitarian, who's here to tell us all about how Bitcoin is going to save the people of the world. So, Jenny, welcome to the show. Glad to have you, and
Thanks,
introduce
Jeremy.
yourself. How did you get into Bitcoin?
Super cool to be here, and it's nice to see you again. We met in person a couple of weeks ago, right? And we got really into talking about the humanitarian side of Bitcoin. So happy to be jamming in on this with you. So my Bitcoin story, I mean, I don't work in the space. I'm actually, built at the moment running a startup that's more in health tech, but really found the whole Bitcoin story super compelling. And it was about a year ago, I would say, and probably not your traditional story of how someone got into Bitcoin. So mine was, I don't know if you've ever had this on your show before from a guest, please tell me if so, but more or less, met a guy and was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. What is Bitcoin? And I fell into this at first, just kind of wanting to understand his world a little bit, but then very quickly discovered that it was helping me reconstruct, basically how I understood the world works. And like I had an economics degree from university, but even through that whole process, I think I learned more going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole about how the world economy, how geopolitics and everything works from going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And then there's the side about the humanitarian promise of Bitcoin, which I think is a very interesting angle that we don't necessarily talk about as much in the West. And so very keen to jam in on that one with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, you say it's sort of non-traditional or whatever. I mean, there's certainly an element. I think it's not an uncommon story, basically, especially for women to have been introduced like by a guy, just because the early parts of the community were just overwhelmingly male. That's just literally how it went. It's at the intersection of so many things, which are sort of male dominated demographically, right? So obviously,
for sure. If you were part
finance,
of this, exactly,
technology,
or like lurking
computer
on,
science,
right,
gambling,
those certain forums back in 2011, 2013. And then I think, I mean, the history of this much better than me, but there comes a point where, now it's like people going in on this and discovering that it's not just about getting rich, and it's not just about different tokens and different currencies, but there is a whole other side to this that is much more about like, what is the vision of society that we could build towards. And I think in a way, I do think that story resonates more with women than the kind of, which coin and maybe even getting really technical. But yeah.
No, it's definitely, and it's one of the most strangest things about Bitcoin. And I think it will be a very long time before society comes to understand all the things that are sort of encapsulated in this, right? And it's kind of the genius of Satoshi that there was a way to bootstrap this idea economically. It is so unique, and it is such a paradigm shift, like how many other things to the world got introduced at the cross point of all this sort of sociology, psychology, economics, technology. It just combines so many things together, and it really is just amazing. And I agree with you, the broader story has been lost a little bit in the mania of we're all trying to get rich, and that's definitely definitely something we'll touch on
Absolutely, yes. There's a great analogy here by Alex Gladstein around the Trojan horse, which I'm sure we'll get to, which is, we can get rich at the same time as encouraging this tool for freedom.
Exactly. Greed is good.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Deployed in useful ways, it absolutely, right, is a very powerful incentive.
Exactly. It's very reliable. People love to look out for themselves. All right. But first off, well, ironically, then we got to touch on the price. So this week, the crypto prices have been getting absolutely destroyed. The Luna UST Ponzi scheme unraveled, and we will talk about that in more detail. But I just want to reiterate for all the listeners of the show that, cryptocurrency is very speculative, and the vast majority of projects are essentially just scams, as this one was. So, do your own research. Don't invest more than you can afford to lose. And if you need, I'm sorry if you've lost a lot of money in UST, really, that's just horrible. But Jet and I did an episode with some bear market advice tips that also had some advice, and we'll link to that episode, so people who are like, wow, or even if it didn't impact them directly, but at least everybody else has got a secondhand view of like things can go south pretty quickly, and you want to have a plan for that. Anyway, we will talk about that. But USD $205 per BCH at the moment, and one BTC buys 146 BCH, so definitely not doing good there. But what do you know? You can't do much about that. So, Jenny, everyone on the show gets to talk about the price. And obviously, like you say, maybe price is not the most interesting thing, or as Roger Ver would say, it's the least interesting thing about Bitcoin, but everybody is still impacted by the price in some sense. How do you handle the sort of volatility and the investing aspect? And do you speculate in multiple coins, or do you have favorites? Do you go hodling for the long term? How do you handle like the actual financial aspects of crypto?
Yeah, really interesting question. I like to keep my life simple in this regard, so I'm pretty much a maximalist. It's, for me, Bitcoin on a long-term horizon. It is very tempting to get in on a lot of these different coins, and I think when I first started, I certainly looked around, read around a little bit, but at the moment I am mostly all in on Bitcoin. And I think with these sort of price swings as well, going with the slogan with buying the dip. So I'm seeing this as more or less more of an opportunity at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's truly the case that in crypto everything's just amped up 100x, right? So when gambling in the altcoins is good, it's really, really good, and everybody seems like a genius. And then when it's bad, it's really, really bad. And anybody who's not involved kind of is pretty glad.
And I was told this even, from the very beginning, that you will go through it at some point if you've been in the space long enough, that you'll experience one of these where you'll dabble and maybe you'll be burned, and then you'll learn your lesson. And I think even with what happened this week, I think it drew into my mind, at least, some of the things that I didn't even question, like stable coins, which thought were totally safe, USDT, USDC, etc. And suddenly now you realize, okay, well, what does a peg actually mean? Just because the currency is a coin is called, it's a perfect peg, doesn't actually necessarily guarantee anything. And so I think there are different sort of illusions of security that people come into this have, and it takes events like this to remind you that there is a lot of risk still involved. Even with Bitcoin, I know that there's a lot of dialogue around the inevitability of Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, talking to some of these core developers, listening to what people talk about, it's a technology. It is highly unlikely that this thing is going to work out in exactly the way that we say it will, and that this is going to hold true over the course of time. So I think just having that kind of awareness of what we're dealing with here, like nothing is inevitable. Don't get too comfortable. If you're going to play with these different coins, you should expect at some point one of them, might something like this might happen, right?
Yeah, and it could just blow up. And definitely, yeah, I mean, if you still have some faith in USDT, I'm gonna have to link you to the CoffeeZilla documentary where he goes into a bit of that, and just that's a giant.
I took out all my USDT this week.
That's good. That's good. All right. Well, at least some good comes out of these scenarios, and that is the classic cryptocurrency experience, the trial by fire. You know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you mind if I hop in and ask a question real quick?
Go ahead.
So you had mentioned that there's still this massive risk, and we don't know if it's gonna end up how we kind of expect it to end up. But what do you think the end goal is for you?
The end goal, do you mean in terms of my where I want this to go? And
yeah, like your experience with cryptocurrency. What would you like your day-to-day involvement with crypto to look like?
I mean, again, to keep it simple, I think I would like to see a world where Bitcoin, of course, rises to more prominence, that this is something that a lot of people around the world have access to, that it provides an alternative form of, let's just say it's a store of value that is uncensorable, and we'll get into some of this stuff. For me, it would be holding like a vast chunk of my my personal wealth, personal property in Bitcoin, and just kind of being comfortable with that. I think it would be, I mean, I'm not of the band camp that says that this is the only thing, like most maxis will say, it's Bitcoin or nothing. I don't think I'm quite there. I think there is probably space for other use cases that we might not have fully seen proof of yet. So I'm totally open to that being the case. And if there's anything compelling there, then sure, maybe I will, I'll enter that space. But for me, I don't think that a lot of these, all of these coins at some point in the future, I think we'll see, at least they won't rise to sort of prominence that we see them do now.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said, and it's a very fine discussion when it comes to this, because I'm sort of the opinion on, and have been explaining it sort of slowly on the show, I guess, that crypto is basically a winner take most kind of phenomenon, right? So saying there's only going to be one coin and everything else is going to be obliterated is obviously wrong, because there's always going to be, experimentation around the edges and stuff. But on the other hand, money is probably, the strongest network effect in the world, because once two people are trading something, it takes a lot, as the whole history of crypto has proved, to get them to switch to something else, because first you got to break it on one end, then you got to break it on the other end, and then that's got to ripple through the whole economy, just with great pain at every single step, right? So the people often are confused when they come to cryptocurrency, and they find that cryptocurrency is super tribal, right? That people are very set on their coin or some other coin. But it's actually very logical, because not only are people financially invested in their coin, and often emotionally invested, and sometimes their careers or other things are also invested. So there's a ton of investment. But on top of that, everybody in crypto does somewhat understand that there is, a trade-off. Like you can't, one coin, if it really gets on a run and really takes off, it'll just crush everything else, out of the end. So what that means is that every coins community has to have the mentality of we're going to number one. And if your coin doesn't have the mentality of we're going to number one, you've kind of already lost before you've started, because you're competing against communities where that is what they're trying to do. And then that obviously creates the tensions, like classically, between BTC and ETH, and ETH are trying to be like, we're going to flip in you, and BTC, no, you're not, this back and forth, right? And there, at the moment, there is a place for both, and there probably will be in the future, but there's nothing to say that the majority of the world is going to have some shifting array of 20 different coins that they're using. Like, that's how fiat currencies work. Every country basically has their own currency. In a crypto world, that's not as likely, maybe.
Exactly, right. I was going to say that, because I hear that argument a lot, just like in the fiat world, we have all these different currencies in different states. But I think that is exactly the point, which is that those fiat currencies exist in different forms because they're so linked to the state. But in a world where, a currency, there is no difference between someone here using, Bitcoin in the UK versus someone transacting in Afghanistan, then that kind of, I guess the need to have that kind of demarcation is gone. So what are the forces that drive the need to have multiple currencies in a world like that, where it's instant, transactions across space and time?
That's right. And the idea, I guess, at least the supposition of cryptocurrency is that a world on one money would be a lot better because once you remove, firstly, all that currency friction of people changing money at airports and daily speculation on foreign exchange markets and all that. Once you get rid of all that, obviously it requires that you not have a government involved, just because the majority of the world is never ever going to buy in on something that is politically biased. It's just even the US dollar, as much as it is the global reserve currency and all that at the moment, you still don't have, Russia and China are not going to agree to use that as the money because they know the UST has their finger on the button, right? They're going to obviously have their alternatives, and there's no world in which all 7 billion people are going to be aligned enough to agree on something unless that thing is neutral, right? Like I guess like the internet or something like that has to be something truly that doesn't privilege anyone over others.
And that brings up a good point around to what extent, I mean, maybe there will be a case for currencies that exist other than the dominant forms because a nation state refuses to allow its citizens to, join the adoption train. So if you're talking CBDCs and things like that, I can see at least a transitory world where, you might have certain regions of the world say, we don't want to participate in this. We're going to have our own currency. And I think that would be interesting to see how that plays out and how effective that is.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of the view that people overestimate the risk of that, I think, because the reality is that, the strong network of effect of money cuts both ways. So when it's small, it's very hard to get going. But then once it's big, it's very hard to deny. And certain countries can't ban Bitcoin or ban crypto in so much as they can ban themselves. So if you want to be banned off Bitcoin and trying to like lock off all your citizens, or you want to be the North Korea of crypto or whatever, well, good luck with that, as the rest of the world is just trading it and everybody's loving it and having a great time. And setting aside all the Ponzi scheming stuff that we talked about, once you get real trade, real commerce happening in cryptocurrency, then that actually does generate like a positive sum effect of people cooperating at scale. And that's just going to be amazing. And anybody who doesn't want to be involved is just going to be left out. And that's a crucial understanding that people need to have when they flick onto cryptocurrency, is just essentially the idea that it's irresistible or undeniable, because there's still, billions of people in the world who don't know or don't care or are actively saying, no, I hate cryptocurrency. I find it, perpetually amusing, like people, crypto skeptics and whatever. And it's like, you just don't understand. It may be in 5 years or in 10 years or in 20 years, but there will come a point where every person will not bother to trade fiat currency with you. That crypto will be the only option. And at that point, you can still be raging and screaming at the clouds, but at a certain point, you're going to discover you're just the last one in the room in your angry little corner while everybody's in the other corner,
Yeah, you won't have a choice. And that goes to sort of the remnant idea, which we will get into later.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's crack on so we can get on to some of these main topics. Just quickly, we check in every week on the stats of the transactions. So BTC still capped at about 300K, as it has been for the last 5 years. Not really doing anything exciting there. BCH has been slowly ticking up, been hitting in the 55 to 60K range. So you'd love to see that. And also then the sent-in USD for BTC has been going nuts, which I would personally say is actually quite bearish, because when there's a lot of activity on the chain, that means everybody's getting excited, and that's either for a good or a bad reason, right? And so either the price is skyrocketing as everybody tries to pump more and more money around, or they are kind of throwing money around because they're prepping to kind of sell out. So the fact that we're not in a big moment of media excitement and euphoria and everything like that means that I take these on-chain signals to kind of say we're going to continue to be in a bit of a bearish slide, as I've been saying for the last 6 months or more on this show. But all that is to say, Jenny, that we, just like the price, I ask every guest on this show, do they put much faith in on-chain metrics? Do they follow that regularly? Some people really like to follow, the miners. Some people really like to follow the exchange inflows and outflows. Some people don't care at all about any of this. Some people think it's a bunch of voodoo. Some people it's a religion. Where do you stand on kind of crypto analytics like this?
Yeah, no, I think it's super cool. I personally don't follow it, but I sometimes get the, really high level synthesized views of this stuff. And I think it is relevant, but no, I don't have a lot to comment on.
Yeah, fair enough. Definitely. It's different for every guest. Someday I should definitely have a guest who is an expert in all this stuff, because I've never had somebody on who is on-chain metrics, like Willy Woo is like the classic guy who did that. But I'm a bit skeptical of a lot of sort of similar, and Will Clemente, these kind of guys who do this sort of content, because a lot of the time I feel like they've got the narrative they want to sell, and then they find the stats to back it up. It's kind of a confirmation bias type of thing, rather than I don't trust them to see the signals as being not what they want, and not finding subconsciously or consciously some way to kind of rationalize. And
I see. So I do. I mean, I've looked at some of the reports from Arcane and also Ark Invest, where what I'm interested in more is what the on-chain analysis is saying about people's behaviors and who is coming in and out. So the fact that, I can't remember the exact percentage now, but there's a huge chunk of people whose, Bitcoins have not moved in 18 plus months, right? So that you have this sort of body of people who are probably characterized as just, holding for the long term. And then also what does it say about institutional money coming in? Is that part of the reason why you're seeing much more of this like correlation between crypto and like classic the stock market these days, where in the past there was less of that sort of parallel. So I think that sort of stuff is interesting to the extent that you can gauge those insights from what's happening.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, that on-chain metrics there's a bit of a spectrum, because there is, on one hand, things like coin days destroyed, which is how long since you last moved the coins, right? And also on-chain fees are quite hard to fake, right? Because if you want to be faking, that you're spending all this money on chain fees, well, you're literally costing yourself money to do it, right? Nobody thinks that Ethereum is faking the amount of on-chain, millions and millions of dollars of fees every day, because that's just a price too high to pay to fake it. It's an unfakeable signal, which I guess is sort of, proof of work. That's the whole idea behind some of this stuff. But then there are other metrics, like you can have your on-chain transactions, or, on chains that have little utility, where they could just spam it up with a bot and just make it look like, oh, well, there's all this activity. So on-chain metrics are certainly not the last word in what's going on, but really interesting. They're a bit of a starting point for the analysis. So that's why we always talk about the price, the the transactions and the send in USD, and then get into the actual discussion, because that's the only way you can truly get to the bottom of it. All right, okay. First topic of the day is that today is May the 15th, which means Bitcoin Cash upgraded about 3 hours ago, a little bit, maybe 4 hours ago. The network underwent its upgrade. So for those who don't know, Jenny, I don't know, you might not be familiar, but essentially the community has slowly resolved onto this policy of basically once a year they have a planned hard fork upgrade. And the idea is that you have basically the first 6 months, or even before that, of the year to, hash out, okay, we want to have these upgrades. Everybody's got to agree on it. It's all decentralized and messy, as currency classically is. And then by about 6 months before the fork, which is in May today, then things all kind of lock in, and it gives time for the exchanges to upgrade, the node software to upgrade, all the different parts of the ecosystem to get on board. If anybody has any last minute objections, they can sort of raise it, and all that sort of stuff, right? So because BCH has had a hugely traumatic time with its upgrades, being the most chain split crypto in history by a long way, with the 3 chain splits, all of which were essentially hostile forks, right? None of it was very friendly. this process has been very hard won. But this year, it seems to have gone swimmingly, and as it seems to have been since the end of the last fork in at the end of 2020. And yeah, it went great. So the network now supports native introspection, which is this idea of allowing transactions to query about themselves, who spent it, and that kind of thing. Very similar to the CTV drama that is going on in BTC right now, but obviously it's already in on BCH and everybody's confident in it, and bigger integers as well. So the limits on, for instance, if you had a certain apps and you were trying to make scripts, you could maybe only make them sized up to 10 BCH size, because the amount of bytes in the transaction would only allow a certain amount, and you had to have all these workarounds for the lack of native introspection and so on. But now you have now you just have bigger integers up to 64 bytes or 64 bits. Must be 64 bits, I think. So that that's all fine. And there was a stream that Satoshi's Angels ran earlier today. It was really great. It's linked there on the slide. I recommend anyone who's interested in BCH to go and check it out. There was a great array of different people. Roger Ver was on it for a bit. Mark Falzon made an announcement of a Bitcoin Cash 2022 conference. Is going to be in November in St. Martin. And then you had Rolando Bryson, who's one of the ministers in the government of St. Martin, and he's accepting BCH for his salary and everything, and it's all spreading around the island. So he was on board and coordinating that. You had Kim.com, who I've previously criticized a bit on the show and still will for. He's announced that he's going to be delivering these great applications, but then he has sort of not delivered on his schedule. Well, he gave a bit of an update, and he said he's got these two projects. He's got one called Cash Rain, which he says is going to let people basically mass airdrop BCH to people. So if you're a streamer or whatever, you can give everyone on your stream $5 of BCH, that kind of idea. And there was another one which was about it's like profiting off of files. So the idea was that if you are an artist and you make a song, you can collaborate with somebody else. You make this song, right? And then you put it out and you set, okay, I'm going to make, the royalty scheme, 50% to me, 30% to my collaborator, and 20% to the promoters. And then promoters can come along sort of permissionlessly without your involvement and put their own wallet address in somehow, and then spread it off. Guys, check out this new single from Justin Bieber or whatever. And then when people buy it via their referral link, essentially, then the money is just going on chain, to you, to your collaborator, and to the promoter as well. So this kind of economic incentive, it'll be interesting. Obviously he hasn't delivered yet, so I'll give him more props if he actually drops it and it all works as promised. But apparently there was beta testing and stuff going on, and it sounds great, because if anything, that's where BCH has struggled, has been in both the marketing side and the commercial utility side. Like the technology is actually very solid, and so is the community, very resilient, very long standing. So all those parts are quite strong. The merchant adoption also pretty good relative to other cryptos, but those incentives driving the currency to new users have been a bit lacking. And yeah, there was even more announcements and different great stuff. So yeah, people can check that out. Yeah,
I have a question here, if I can. I'm genuinely quite curious, between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, where do you see more, and maybe you're a bit biased on this, but where do you see more of the innovation and the sort of upgrades and so on happening?
Well,
is there a reason?
Yeah, I mean, BCH essentially is just flattening BTC, no question. Obviously I'm biased, and take this with a grain of salt. I mean, you can ask somebody else and get their take too, right? But it all goes back originally to the fork, which is that the BTC side basically have a regressive mentality, right? The idea was they sort of sold this lie, essentially, that hard forks are evil and bad for the network, even though Bitcoin had done hard forks before the split. With Satoshi did some and Gavin did some, and it was all fine. That's just how a cryptocurrency upgrades, and instead they repackaged everything with this part is not exactly a lie. It is true in some sense that stability has value, right? That if it's reliable, if it's not changing, then people can put more faith in it, right? Because they know in 20 years, Bitcoin BTC is still going to be Bitcoin BTC, and Ethereum is going to be, who knows what, right? So you can't have that stability and reliability over time. But at least in my view, they essentially they didn't. BCH is kind of splitting the difference, right? Where Bitcoin BTC people will say, look, if you have hard fork upgrades and you have these kind of things going on, then what's to stop people just changing the 21 million coin limit, or what's to stop them, doing any other kind of shenanigans? Who knows? Will be Ethereum, next week if we start, if we don't have like hard limits on what we're prepared to upgrade. Whereas that's not really true, because the BCH community does do updates and they do add things and they do change things. But on the other hand, anything like changing the 21 million limit, or trying to add in more custodians or more like backdoors or whatever, is going to get instantly wrecked by the community. And that's been proven because there has literally been 3 separate cryptocurrency teams which have all been told to fork off, because the BCH community said we're not having that, right? They didn't want small blocks like BTC. They didn't want Craig Wright and his shenanigans with BSV, and they didn't want Amori putting in a dev tax with eCash. And so all those, they're all out, and the BCH community is still just chugging along with the white paper. So having an idea that we're never going to upgrade anything just means you're guaranteed to get flattened in the long run, basically, because the only constant is change. And the BTC community, I think, make a huge mistake, on a lot of fronts, in trying to say, look, we're digital gold, because the thing about gold is that it hasn't changed for 5,000 years, and that's true. And if you want to be gold, well, gold already exists, and even digital gold is not really that exciting. The reason that we have cryptocurrency, and it's called cryptocurrency, not digital gold, is because it's a new category, and that new category plays by different rules. And the rules of crypto is that all your competitors are going to be upgrading and trying new things and innovating and whatever. And the origins of maximalism, which I told you about when we met, was the idea that Bitcoin would be able to absorb innovation from all the other, little side projects, not this kind of stagnant, if we never change, dogmatic view. So yeah, that's my view.
Yeah, and I can absolutely see the merits in some of what you're saying. The only pushback I would have is, around the whole likening it to digital gold, and how much innovation really is needed, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to create is a better form of money, right? Something, and in order to do that, it just needs to work. And if the Bitcoin community believes it's already found the most critical elements that's fundamental in the protocol and it works, there's, in a sense, I can understand, there's a huge reluctance to innovate in a way that could compromise those things, because what you really want to do is defend to the death some of those elements, and rather than trying to turn it into something that tries to fit a million other use cases, which is the criticism we get a lot, whether it's Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, does it have smart contracts, does it have, but it doesn't need to. I think that's kind of the argument that I would push a little bit, is it doesn't need to be everything, because to be a better form of money is already achieving a lot. And I guess that's the difference between innovation where you're trying to fundamentally make it something else, versus innovation that is taking the core elements of the protocol and making that better somehow, less susceptible to attack, more scalable, I guess, all of those things, right? So probably just like to separate out what we mean by innovating on that network.
Can I hop in here for a second?
Yeah. Go on.
Okay, so I think BTC proved it cannot be better money, because 5 years ago it cost $70 goddamn to make a transaction. That prices out not 60% of the world, like 70, 75% of the world. And then to go to layer 2s or non-custodial solutions, we're going back to the third-party intermediaries. We're denying what the abstract of the Bitcoin white paper says. And then, I think I mean, I haven't looked into this myself, but just the math of like, if we wanted to onboard everyone to Lightning Network, even their own white paper says they need over gigabyte blocks, like they need multiple
133 megabytes. You basically need 133 megabyte blocks on Lightning Network if the only thing is opening channels from here for the next 50 years or whatever it is. Like with 1 megabyte blocks, it takes over 80 years. Like it's never going to ever happen. If that's with no channel closures, no disputes, no other side chains, no regular on transaction, nothing, right?
Definitely not saying that Lightning has fixed everything or that it doesn't have its own challenges. I guess it's just more on a fundamental level, sort of Bitcoin doesn't need to innovate beyond its, and I don't think you're saying that either. I think we're on the same page there.
I think we all want to see Bitcoin as money, right? I think and this is part of why I asked that question in the beginning of like what that end goal is. But I think how we use money is also different, right? And we need to be able to account for everyone's different use cases rather than, I mean, right now, the only people that are buying BTC that I'm aware of are like middle class people. It's not becoming a reserve currency for the world. It's not becoming a savings account for people. It's definitely not being a store of value, especially in market times like this. So yeah, there either needs to be a new narrative creation for the BTC camp in my mind, or just an admission of like, hey, we want this because sometimes it increases our fiat dollars, and we're not Bitcoin maximalists, we're fiat maximalists. We want more fiat dollars for our Bitcoin the day we decide to cash out.
I mean, yeah, like, so Jenny, I think one thing that, you might find really interesting, and I think is going to be a big, not problem necessarily, but there's going to be a huge sort of cognitive dissonance going on as BCH sort of gets its way back into the mix a little bit more. Is that, to me, the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash communities, they share a history and all that sort of stuff, and they're now like diverging over time as they go going their separate ways. But I think of it like one of those superhero shows or anything. There's always the episode where the main character who has all their like skills and abilities and whatever, but then they meet their like long lost twin or whatever who's been like on a different
usually
path.
An evil twin though.
Exactly. Yeah, but they like are battling their twin or whatever, and then they discover the twin has like some weird moves that they don't know, and they're like, what? Like they use all their moves and the twin can do those moves, but then the twin comes up with like some other moves and they're like, I've never seen that before, and they get a bit wrecked, right? That's essentially what's going on with my camera. That's essentially what the BCH community is like, is that they do honestly have a lot of those same ideas that you would recognize from the Bitcoin BTC community. Yes, we're not going to compromise on the mission of money. No, we're not just going to throw in whatever random garbage. We're not turning into Solana. It is going to be very high priority on decentralization, right? But on the other hand, it's not so dogmatic about we're never changing anything. Instead, it is like we are going to absorb innovation and improvements. We are going to look at, as hardware gets better, are we going to able to push the boundaries a little bit further? So for instance, I don't know if you know, but there's Smart BCH, right? So the Bitcoin Cash community has made a side chain which is the EVM. It's Ethereum compatible essentially, and is a bunch more scalable than Ethereum like to begin with. But it's backed by the proof of work of the Bitcoin mining network. That's another thing, is like Bitcoiners versus the world will, there'll be this whole proof of work versus proof of stake or whatever other like garbage, you can come up with. Well, the Bitcoin Cash community is still in the Bitcoin camp on that. Like, it's proof of work. We're not changing it to your other, random as system, that's like the foundations of this. But on the other hand, okay, well, why don't we just have an EVM chain and we'll just back it with the proof of work mining? So it's I think there's going to be loads of people who are going to discover the BCH community, and you kind of need to relearn a lot of what or unlearn a lot of what you learned, because a lot of it is right, the 21 million coin limit, deflationary, blah 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 blah. But on the other hand, some of it is also wrong, at least from a BCH perspective.
It's really interesting, Jeremy, because every time I talk to you, I'm like, he's got a point here. Like it's compelling, right? What you say, all these things, logically it all makes sense. But then I walk away and I look at just the current state of play. And as you referenced at the beginning, I mean, Bitcoin has just surpassed in visibility. It's in a lot of ways, it feels like the community feels this whole block size conversation has been settled. And, you know, where we found something, it's not perfect. Like Lightning, it has got its own problems, but people are focusing on the next problems to solve. And in a way, it's almost like, well, to what extent has that train already left the station? And, you know, I'm not saying it's impossible. Of course, like we have no idea what will happen. And I do think, you know, for sure, like it seems like you're fighting the right kind of battles based on, you know, all of the original intent behind, you know, Bitcoin's story. But it's almost like, well, where would the resources be better? Like, should we just take the one that looks like it's got the biggest shot and try to make that the best?
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Jet's like falling out of his chair.
Yeah, I know.
No, it's good. You can be controversial on the show, but you know what Jet is about to tell you? He's about to tell you that BCH is the one with the best shot. That's the whole split. You know, it's like when I told you when we met and you said, oh, you think Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin? And I'm like, yes, to me it is, because Bitcoin BTC stopped being Bitcoin. And yes, they got the brand name. And the most amusing thing about it is that not only has BCH been absolutely crushed in the market, I'm not saying that's definitely a factor. That definitely shows that we've got a lot of work to do and we need to turn the ship around. But the funny thing about it is that Bitcoin BTC people will spend all day telling you that the market has spoken and it's over. But there's two reasons that is very clearly like a lie on its face. So the first is, well, the market never stopped speaking. If the market had spoken, USD is the biggest currency in the world, and you may as well give up right now, guys. Like, your own argument cuts against you if you just think about it for more than 2 seconds. But the other reason is that BCH is not gone. As much as they want to say that we're gone, you can post, Roger Ver came back to Twitter and made one post. He's immediately got millions of people in his comments. It's over. It's over when you don't need to tell someone it's over, right? If you're still trying to tell them it's over, stop, go away, it's clearly not over. You're still there telling them to just stop, you know? Like, they're still on Peter McCormack's podcast and everything in the Bitcoin BTC community. They even have a special name. They call it Bcash. Why? They don't have a troll name for Ethereum. They don't have a troll name for all these other coins. They just call them shit coins. But Bcash is special, and they will go out of their way to tell you that it's over and it's dead and nobody cares about it. And nobody is more emphatic about the need to talk about Bitcoin Cash than people who say it's dead. You know, there are dead coins, but they're dead. Nobody talks about them. But Bitcoin Cash is still here, and they cannot get rid of us because it's that twin thing I said. You know, if we were so centralized and we were just a couple of people, and if it was all some scheme of Roger Ver, it's been 4.5 years, guys. We're not here. In fact, we just got in a mega upgrade, and like, we've got a conference coming up. Explain that, like, that you can't. The only thing to do is to learn the history and how did things go down and so on and so forth, you know?
So I have an obligatory Bitcoin will be cash statement.
Bitcoin will be cash.
Go for it.
And I would also, I've made this argument a couple times recently with Bitcoin maximalists, where I think that the market is fraudulent. I want USDT to absolutely collapse. I do not think the price of BTC would be able to sustain itself without new tethers being injected into the ecosystem. And we know that, since like 2020, that Tether has lied to the SEC. They've never been fully backed or commercially fully audited. They've never shown either their Q1 or, people are excited for their Q2 2022 stuff, but we're not going to see it for quite a long time. And even if they do release it, it probably won't be real numbers and this and that. And so, like, I don't think the genuine price of BTC is actually more than like $4,500. I think even with all of the community, it's largely made up of bad market actors and commercial money. And I think people thought Luna was bad. Oh man, you wait.
Let's get on to that then. That's the next topic of the day. So we can get everybody's hot takes on this, but it's quite topical, right? So this week we've had the UST Luna implosion. So for everybody who doesn't know, I've got to give a bit of a summary. And so firstly, about a year ago, almost exactly in June of last year, I think I made a video called the Cryptocalypse, which was basically about what Jed is talking about. One day, all this shit with all the chickens are going to come home to roost with Tether, and it's going to blow up, and it's going to be exactly like what we just saw with Luna, essentially. Because it's funny you were talking about stable coins, because stable coins are such an interesting element of the market, right? Because there's basically two ways you can do a stable coin, neither of which is really super viable in the long term. So the first one is that you have a certain amount of tokens, but you back them with real US dollars in a bank account, right? That's great and fine, but the obvious problem is you've introduced counterparty risk, which is that the person behind the coin, how do you make sure they still have the dollars that they say they do, and how does somebody not get their fingers in there and the usual shenanigans take place, and it's a disaster like USDT is right now. So that's one model. The other model is you say, okay, we're going to collateralize it with all this other like stuff, but the question is, what are you going to collateralize it with? So you can collateralize it with Bitcoin, or you can over collateralize it. You can have 400% reserves or whatever. But at the end of the day, that always essentially means the whole coin is essentially speculating on something else, trying to sort of, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, the whole point of a stable coin is supposed to be stable, and it's supposed to be redeemable for dollars. Ultimately, the only thing that has the value of $1 is $1, right? Because even stable coins, they fluctuate up and down, because people on the downside either take in these custodian risks, or people on the upside say, well, this is more useful than $1 because I can use it to yield farm on Anchor or whatever, right? So anyway, that's my quick spiel about stablecoins. But UST Luna was this particularly egregious example where this guy called Do Kwon got himself on top of the world by this idea that, look, if we have a $1 stable coin, we'll pair it with a regular crypto, which is super volatile. So basically, as people buy into the regular crypto, which was called Terra, but had the symbol Luna, very confusingly, it would the price of that would go up, and then you could burn $1 of that to get $1 of stable UST, and then the UST you could cash back out for the Luna. You could burn your UST to get a Luna. So that's, at a simple explanation, that sounds like genius. Well, the market has created $1 of value over here, so we can exchange it for the other one here, and the price of UST will stay stable, because arbitrages, if the price is going up or down, they'll either burn or create more UST to get it back to $1. It all seems great, right? But the problem is that the free market giving $1 of value to the Luna tokens, there's no guarantee that that is maintained, because as crypto market caps prove, there's a very big divergence between the actual amount of money something is worth under pressure and how much something is worth nominally, right? So if I make a new token, Jeremy token, and I give it a supply of 1 billion, and then I sell it to Jet for $1, well, we've just created $1 billion cryptocurrency. Took 5 seconds. The only problem is, it's not like we can sustain $1 billion of sales. In fact, the first person to sell is going to crash the price to zero. So Do Kwon thought he was a genius at making up this system, but really he just made a hyper accelerated Ponzi scheme that operated at twice the it's self-fulfilling, right? Because as people are buying Luna to mint UST, that pumps the price of the Luna, which gets more people excited, and it just spirals up and up and up. But the exact same mechanism works on the way down, which is once people start cashing out of UST at the same time as they start selling the Luna, then it just gets worse and worse for everyone involved, as the people at the end try and get their money before it's all gone to zero. So we've seen this huge rise in Luna token, which was over $100 and something dollars, and then on the May the 5th it was $86, and in the last week or so, or in the week or so to May 11, it just hit a cliff and it just fell down to 0.01 cents. So the whole thing just went completely bust. And anybody who was paying attention to my channel, hopefully you would have got out ahead of time, because I was on a podcast with Joel Valenzuela 2 or 3 days before it happened, calling this out as a massive Ponzi scheme. So hopefully anybody who listened to that would be okay. But one interesting wrinkle to the story before I get Jenny and Jet's takes is that there was this element where Do Kwon, who's now feeling like he's the king of the world because his coin is going insane and he's getting really rich, thought, you know what, I'm going to make some mint moves and I'm going to back my token with Bitcoin, BTC, which is obviously, yet again, another thing that if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, makes no sense. If the stable mechanic works, why do you need it to be backed by anything? And if it doesn't work, well, then you've got bigger problems than whether or not you've got Bitcoin BTC to back, and you're essentially turning the whole thing into a leverage bet on Bitcoin, but with also custodian risk, similar to the way that Michael Saylor has turned MicroStrategy stock into a proxy with extra custodial risk bet on the price of leveraged Bitcoin, right? So he purchased all this BTC to back the coin, but then once things started to fall apart, he of course had to sell them, which exacerbated the problem because that depressed the price of the whole crypto market, which is also bad for Luna, and everything kind of came apart. And unfortunately, there's been multiple reports of people who have killed themselves over this, basically because their entire net worth just went boom to zero. And it turns out that a lot of people in Luna didn't understand any of what I've just explained, and they had put their entire net worth on it, which was because of this thing called the Anchor Protocol, which was giving a 20% yield. Again, where did the money come from that? Well, it was just funded more Ponzi scheming. You're basically taking money from people who'd invested in Luna to pay themselves back out of their own money the yield returns and not be able to give them their principal back at the end. So it's just this huge disaster. And the whole thing about it is that we're going to end up with the same thing happening with Tether at some point. So I just want everybody on this who's listening to the show right now to be aware that at one day we're going to have that exact same thing. But that's my summary of all what has happened. Jenny, what did you think of all of this?
It's nuts. It's really, it's insane. But I mean, part of, when you're saying all of this, part of me is thinking, how can you not smell the kind of Ponzi scheme nature of this? When you hear something like 20% yield, right? Like, where is that coming from? If it sounds too good to be true, there's probably something fishy going on. And I'm just curious, is it just people are hoping that they kind of know that this might collapse at some point, but we're hoping to go for the ride and pull out before it does? And I'm genuinely kind of curious what the mindset is, or because it feels like some of this stuff, it's sort of inevitable at some point in time, like you say with Tether, even that this is not going to go the way that it proclaims it will, right?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the people who were invested were just naive. That's the first thing. But I think there's also just a heavy element of people want to believe their own story. And exactly like we were just talking about before with the BTC and BCH price, where the momentum is going is by itself convincing to a lot of people. Just because that seems to be what everybody's doing, well, they'll pile into it. So Luna was on this huge tear. It was up from the unknowns of the crypto market, and it was at number 9 before it got destroyed. Now, number 9 on the crypto market cap is a lot of free marketing just by nature of being number 9, and people don't learn their lesson. Like, just because it's in the top 10 on coin market cap does not mean it is in any way a solid project. Actually, it just means they're the best Ponzi scheme of this week, and anybody who's been around long enough sees the top 10 change over and over and over as coins like Luna get into the top 10. You can look at the top 10 from 2017 or from 2015 or 2013, and you pretty quickly get the idea.
Left, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Bitcoin and Ethereum, they're real projects. XRP is still real, but it's a scam. And Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, even Dogecoin, they've got at least some sort of solid back. Once again, mostly proof of work coins, right? With an actual network of miners, with devs, with a community, with all this, stuff that you're not going to find in the latest hype of the day. And just, I've got to kind of call him out a little bit here. Colin Talks Crypto, who I've been, had some exchanges with over our varying, views on the market. And he was, mad celebrating. Oh, look, I've bought all this Luna and it's rocketed up. I told everyone it's this genius innovation, but really you just got to wait till the, Ponzi scheme comes undone. And then, he's been massively wrecked, and anybody who listened to his advice and who didn't get out first is also wrecked. I mean, this whole anchor thing was you had to lock up your money for whatever it was, 3 weeks or something like that. and that just leaves you so exposed that even once things start to turn bad and everybody's rushing for the exit, you're just fucked. You can't sell cryptographically, let alone, if you can get the right market price. So we're going to see more and more schemes of this, and this is why I'm skeptical of all stable coins. The best one seems to be USDC. I still also have a lot of doubts about that, but that seems to be the most reliable one, and DAI is the best algorithmic one from my very limited understanding. But neither of those I'm very convinced about. What I am more convinced about, and what is going to be really good, is that this BCH upgrade now means the AnyHedge guys are going to be able to flesh out the contracts so that essentially there's going to be a BCH-backed stablecoin where what happens is somebody wants to speculate on the price of crypto, don't they always, right? Somebody thinks BCH is going to go up, and so they are prepared to bet on that, like going long on an exchange, and somebody else wants to lock their value at a stable amount of money. They want a stable coin, right? So the way you just pair those two people up, which is that I want to leverage 5x bet on BCH, and somebody else wants their USD value to stay constant. So once those two people meet, basically if the price goes up, they're paying me, and if the price goes down, I'm paying them. So their USD value is always stable, and I'm getting to gamble at a much higher frequency. So now the AnyHedge guys have actually built this, and once and it's all decentralized, it all operates with on-chain contracts and everything like that. And now and you can even get interest if you're on the right or the wrong side of the trade. So there's even an incentive to hold your money in one or the other. And now with this upgrade, I'm sure they're going to be rolling out some good stuff over the next year too, which is that now once you have that decentralized marketplace going of people gambling on the upside or locking their USD value, is you'll then be able to have like you can even trade those. So now Jet and I can trade a locked USD amount of value directly on the Bitcoin Cash network, where we're actually only transacting Bitcoin Cash behind the scenes, but it's still a locked amount. And so that's then essentially you're passing around contracts for how much locked value there is. And once that gets integrated with the point of sale stuff and merchants only wanting USD and stuff, all this, it'll just be like this whole Bitcoin Cash powered economy that can just seamlessly run while people slowly transition over from USD, which they're still used to. And then if they ever want some BCH, all they do is they just slowly ramp down the percentage of their contract until it gets to zero, and then they're in the Bitcoin Cash economy and fully exposed to the volatility. But they can have 50% volatility or 30% or 100%. It's up to them, and all done trustlessly on chain, no custodians, nothing. So that's going to be absolutely mega. Right.
Interesting.
All right, cool. Next topic then. I don't know, unless you have anything more you want to say about that, or we can.
No. I think we don't ever want to talk about Luna again, probably.
Yeah, well, cautionary
exactly.
tale.
Besides
Historical
sense, yeah.
Exactly, historical reminder to everyone. Exactly. All right, Bitcoin in El Salvador. So I wanted to get your take on this, because when we talked the other day, you told me you'd been to El Salvador and you'd seen how it was going and everything, and we didn't get much of a chance to really talk through it, and this is a perfect time to do it. And the specific question that I want to put to you, because I think you might be more of a neutral middle ground observer, is that there's been reports of Max Kaiser or Peter McCormack or whoever goes to El Salvador and says it's great, we're spreading adoption, everyone's loving it, they're getting the idea, financial freedom, yada yada. They're basically talking their own book. And then on the other side, people who are not as invested in selling that narrative, people like Mark Falzon did an excellent documentary, The Dark Side of Bitcoin in El Salvador, The Nudge, and various other people who are more on this sort of community non-BTC side, who are in like the Bitcoin Cash or the Dash community, have gone over there to check it out and give sort of their take. And their take is often very, very different, which is like, okay, there is some, it is starting to happen a little bit, but there's also a lot of problems. Obviously, a lot of people don't really agree with how Nayib Bukele runs his country in the first place. There's been anti-Bitcoin protests. People don't really understand, what's happening or not happening. The wallet numbers are inflated because people just cashed out their $30 that the government gave them for free and forgot about it. All of this stuff, right? It's very hard to get a sense of, is there actually a good amount of groundswell adoption? So you've been there. Tell us, how was it?
Yeah, it's really interesting topic. And I noticed you talked about Bukele dropping his laser eyes as well, which is...
Well, now the price is down. He's
right.
So
you could
it's
very
easy to be a
understandably,
genius,
yeah, he's probably copping a lot of flack, so probably just sensitively removing the laser eyes for now. I think, okay, I'll start with maybe just, factually the kind of experience on the ground, right? So when I was there, it was a couple of months after they'd first announced Bitcoin becoming legal tender. And it was when they had the sort of second, I guess, it was a conference around adopting Lightning. So the actual activity on Bitcoin Beach was that you could go up to whether it was a bar or a, street store, someone standing by the side of the road, and pay with Bitcoin or over the Lightning network. Or on chain, but preferably over the Lightning network. And it was that experience was very uniform. So around Bitcoin Beach, you absolutely could do that. And so I guess when people who aren't so familiar with Bitcoin comment around how there isn't anywhere in the world where you can actually pay with this thing yet, I think El Salvador did show that no, in a sort of, at least at that point in time, with the amount of Bitcoiners that were in town, everything worked very smoothly. I think with the questions around, what's happening in terms of this, how widespread is the adoption in the country, how much of this is something that the citizens themselves wanted versus took the $30 incentive, as you say, and then sort of discarded. I think you probably want to pry that apart a little bit, because there's, on the one hand, how much is it being used as an actual currency to transact day to day? And I think you're probably right there. There's a lot of reports around, first of all, the whole Shivo wallet, right, got a lot of criticism. But I think the criticism around that needs to be separated from around broader, like introducing Bitcoin, because there were problems with the app, people's money disappeared, so it made sense, right? And then also if you're talking about a population that generally, low income, they cannot handle that kind of volatility in the price. So unless you're holding Bitcoin for the long term, you don't really want to transact with Bitcoin on a daily basis. And I think everyone, very, it's sort of common sense that we wouldn't expect necessarily to see Bitcoin as a major form of payment right now. That I think is a separate question to how is Bitcoin actually serving the country of El Salvador. So I think I read a stat that, when they introduced this whole, initiative with Shivo and everything, it was something like, before that, financial inclusion or people's access to financial system was like 23%. And then in a matter of months, right, that had increased to 60%, which was an effort that they'd attempted for years and not been able to make that kind of change. So there has been some good of that. And then you got to look at also, I think, the bigger statement around, what do you call it? Repatriate. The word when you send money back home. Remittances, not repatriations, goodness. Remittances, right. Like the majority of the benefit probably comes from that, because there's something like $6 billion in remittances every year going into El Salvador. So like savings from Western Union alone is around, I think Bukele said it was around like 400 million, right? Something like almost 10%. And that's huge. And I think they're very different narratives, which all get bundled up. And it's very, very easy to find criticisms in the space, but I think it's also equally easy to find, call out some of the benefits that this whole process has brought to El Salvador.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously you can sort of see from the BCH side, we've got a bit of both sides of the fence, right? You're right. There's a lot of separate angles to this which need picking apart, and definitely, obviously, we completely support. Or I guess I can not speak for everyone. I just speak for myself. Like, I support at least in theory the idea of the Bitcoin BTC community having a go. I think they are, obviously well intentioned. They are educating people. Obviously, I agree. The use case for remittances and stuff is amazing. The sort of rub, I guess, for the BCH community is that they also, especially historically, while the Bitcoin BTC community were store of value, hodl your coins, the BCH community has been, guys, it's got to be a functional economy. And that's been the focus kind of since day one. So you've got the Bitcoin Cash City in Townsville, obviously in St. Kitts and St. Martin's now. There's actual substantial on the ground adoption and people using it, but it's been done in the exact opposite way. Instead of convincing the government dictator, this is what we should do and all that, and kind of forcing it onto people and airdropping funds to people who don't understand all that. Instead, it's kind of the other way around, which is, okay, we're just going to go door to door and just convince merchants one by one and educate them. This is a private key. This is how you use it, and blah, blah, blah. And that's very hard to do as well. It has its own pros and cons.
100%, right. And you could see that in El Salvador as well. Like, a lot of people were not yet at that level of financial literacy to understand what was happening, even the difference between an on-chain and an off-chain, or the difference between Shiba wallet versus Bitcoin itself. So but I think that's a process, and I think what something like this does is at least show to the world that it is possible to have Bitcoin used in a transactional sense. Whether or not right now at this point in time, with the sort of price volatility that we see, that is a desirable thing for most citizens in a lower income country to actually use, different question, right? But it's, I think, as a use case, as a first first story out there, it paves the way to sort of more countries trying out this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, the ironic part of it is, for me, is that you say like it's a first step and it's a proof of concept and all that, and it kind of comes back to the whole reason for the split, which is that, from my perspective, Bitcoin BTC have had now 5 years to just blast off and just prove and spread Bitcoin everywhere, and here we are in 2022, and things are barely kind of scrappily happening in El Salvador. There was more Bitcoin adoption in the world probably in 2015 or in 2016. This was why at that time the momentum was ramping up massively. Dell was taking it, Overstock was taking it, Microsoft was like starting to accept it, like Newegg started accepting it, like merchant adoption was on the rise. Transactions were going up, everything like that. It was going great. It was fantastic. And everybody was loving it, right? And then obviously things degenerated into this whole block size civil war, which kind of stopped the momentum. But the point that the BCH side had at that time was, okay, yeah, maybe you can do Lightning Network, but it's years away, from being ready, if it even is going to work at all, right? We don't know that, but what we do know right now is that Bitcoin's going great. Hardware is not going to just crap out overnight. Like, people are improving their storage space, which has continued happening. So let's just raise the blocks even just a little bit and just keep the train rolling. So as much as the Bitcoin BTC side feel like we're sort of slowly starting to break through, when you look back at the opportunity cost of 5 years as to how far things have gotten, it's like a pittance compared to kind of what could have been. But that's a very hard thing to explain and capture to people who weren't there and didn't see the momentum at the time, or to see the fact that the Bitcoin Cash community has done, an equally better or similar enough job in other places without any government intervention and on a fraction of the resources given, like we talked about, the difference in the price, the difference in the branding, the difference in the awareness, the difference in the media coverage.
Do you have any prominent examples of sort of where that's taken place?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll send you some videos later, right? But you have the Bitcoin Cash City in Australia, so Townsville, and they literally have several hundred merchants and a bunch of people who live only on Bitcoin Cash. They don't have, or they don't use, their fiat bank accounts. Earlier, I've got some episodes of this podcast about it. I'll link you to that. And then more recently, there was in St. Kitts and Nevis, obviously where Roger Ver is, and there's a bunch of other people. They've done the exact same thing. There's like hundreds of merchants and a local, shops and stuff accepting it, and a circulating economy among the locals, right? And now that's spreading to the other islands. So you have St. Martin, like I said at the start of the show, one of the finance ministers there, he also, got involved, and he's taking all his salary in Bitcoin Cash. And he's not doing that just because he likes Bitcoin Cash, but because all the merchants are accepting it so he can spend it. And so that's why we're going to have a conference there, sort of like Bitcoin 2022. And ironically, now the Bitcoin Cash community is starting to kick it up a gear in Florida, where the BTC 2022 conference was, because Mark Falzon, he was there and he asked and he found a bunch of local, they don't even accept Bitcoin, in places around the conference. So I think he's going to just do a bit of an end run and just set up a bunch of merchants around there and build a little Bitcoin Cash economy. And by the time everyone comes back for next year, they're going to be like, wait, Bitcoin Cash is accepted everywhere, not Bitcoin BTC. So I mean, like and he's working with some of the local government and stuff, because they want to spread crypto adoption. But the Bitcoin Cash community, that's their thing. They're on the ground. Actually, we want to create a peer-to-peer cash economy, right? There is none of this hodl, store of value, laser eyes, we're all getting there isn't any of that. People are like, we got to actually, it's a economy, we got to make an economy work. So even being as under resourced as we are, relatively speaking, we're still like making a practical dent. But these things don't sort of get a lot of visibility, which is part of the reason I started this podcast in the first place. But I will send you some examples.
I think that there were very interesting use cases, examples you've given here. Is Bitcoin Cash not susceptible to the same issue though of price volatility, to have that as something, predominantly an economy run on something like Bitcoin Cash?
It is, but there's 2 or 3 mitigating factors. So the first one is that the Bitcoin Cash community, because they are trying to make it work, they encounter those pain points much more acutely. Like, so obviously, as has been happened with this Lightning Network and so on, right? It's easy if you're not trying to make an economy to say, oh, it generally goes up in the long term, everyone hodl and we'll be fine. But the Bitcoin Cash community is seeing that pain, and so they are like the any hedge stuff I was just telling you about. They do have to proactively make and deliver working solutions to this stuff, because people are complaining to their face about it. And the second thing is what we'll see, or the feedback that we get is, the more you use it as a cash economy, the less volatility is a problem, right? Because the thing about cash, and especially like somewhere like El Salvador in the Caribbean or whatever, is that people are living more day to day, right? So even though crypto is quite volatile, if I receive some Bitcoin Cash today at $100 and I spend it tomorrow at $95, over time, if I'm earning and spending as that cycle goes on, it's like a natural form of dollar cost averaging. So you do actually mitigate the volatility the more frequently you have,
I guess, a lesser share of people who are buying and selling large quantities, more from an investment mindset.
And you also have people that are less worried about the volatility, because instead of sitting at home watching the price go up and down, panicked about, is my money going to work or not? Instead, they can see like, okay, the price has gone down a little bit today, but I can spend it with this. It's I can spend the money, right? The reason the Bitcoin BTC community gets so worked up about volatility is because they don't actually use it. So they're just crossing their fingers and praying that it's going to go to the moon one day, or it's going to crash and they're all going to be wrecked, right? Whereas if, like, how many Bitcoin BTC people have not made a single on-chain transaction in the, like we were talking about with those coins being like locked up. Sure, some of that is big investors who are just playing the long game, but there's also a portion of small investors who have no actual tangible touch with the network. If the fees went to $1,000 overnight, they wouldn't even notice, because they're just in their zen state, right? Whereas the second that Bitcoin Cash stops working for payments, fees go up, or there's network congestion, or like the upgrade we did today, if there'd been a problem or whatever, it would have been all over. The whole community would have been screaming instantly, because everybody's actually trying to pay for things with it, Jet.
Yeah. So there's only been, I think, 1 or 2 occasions where I've ever sold BCH for Canadian dollars, and that was in a situation where I couldn't convince the person I was paying to accept Bitcoin Cash, and it was a large enough sum that I was like, come on. But the volatility, so I've been consistently buying Bitcoin Cash since 2017. And it's weird because I've always had the spend and replace narrative in my head, and I've never realized that I'm doing the BTC maxi stacking sats, right? So, but the volatility for me has never once been a concern, because I've always taken the dollars that I'm putting into Bitcoin Cash as gone, burned forever. I'm never getting them back, and I don't want them back. I want as much BCH as possible because of how useful it is for me in my life. So there have been periods of my life where I've completely lived off Bitcoin Cash. And even in markets like this, like, part of my hype for USDT and wanting USDT to implode is I know that the market will tank and I will be able to get a bunch of Bitcoin Cash. And as far as like the argument of, and I know this isn't about that, but just kind of tangentially, the argument of like, well, the market's decided, look, this chart's, that was like the first year maybe where everyone saw Coinbase release BCH and they were like, $4,000, oh my God. Anyone that's gotten into Bitcoin Cash after that has floated anywhere between $80 and $300. And while that's significant, that's not so much that, like, you know, you're perma-wrecked. So, yeah, it's the volatility. And I mean, I'm sure Joel has made similar points. It's never been really that much of a concern. You just,
I mean, yeah.
You just get as
The more
much
you use it.
as you can when you can. You spend it as money when you want to transact, and it just feels natural at that point.
This is a really interesting angle, and all I would say is, you know, I would query whether everybody has that mentality. Because if you're introducing this, right, if you're introducing this to like a new country, people who've never touched cryptocurrency before, and you're saying we're going to create a new economy for you, and you're going to use this new currency, but the value that you're going to get as income or the cost of rent is going to, you know, fluctuate day to day. I think that's a really hard sell.
Well, right, but that's honest. Like, think of if the Max Kaisers went to El Salvador and they were like, "Hey, your country could be wrecked forever if this goes wrong." Do you think he'd be like, "Okay, yeah, we'll give it a shot"?
I mean, this is what, and you'll see on this. I'll send you this episode later, but we did an episode a couple of weeks ago with Bitcoin Jason, who is in the Bitcoin Cash City, and he's doing merchant adoption and stuff like that. Because the Bitcoin Cash community approaches things from a bottom up instead of a top down perspective, they do attack these problems. So yes, the price can go down, and it is, you know, potentially a problem. But the thing he does is, well, firstly, he's upfront with them and he tells them that stuff straight away. He doesn't sell them the moon that we're going to be, you know, he's explained to them this is a payment system. I'm trying to pay you, and crypto is volatile and all that. But then on the other hand, he's a real person that if they have problems, if they're like the market's crashing, they bring him up and they say, what's going on? And he explains to them, okay, Terra just depegged and this is a disaster and blah, 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 blah. And like, that is not a very, it's like, you know, Bitcoin, Cash or, you know, BTC does not have a support hotline that you can call. The community is that support hotline. And the Bitcoin BTC support hotline is like full of like online weirdos with laser eyes that if anybody gets upset, they try and, you know, see what's going on. And they just get told, you're an idiot, stack sats, hodl, you know, have fun staying poor. Like, that's the Bitcoin BTC support line. The Bitcoin Cash support line is, yeah, you know, maybe, you know, just make sure you buy in slowly over time. Are you still transacting with people? Yeah, it sucks. We're not going to, you know, there's an experiment. Maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't. We're not trying to sell you that it's inevitable that you're going to be a millionaire in 10 years. We're trying to tell you today you can, you know, join a new economy. It's just a different approach, I guess.
I promise not all the BTC hotlines say that.
Yes, no, I know.
There's also, what I'm discovering as I get more into the community is that there is also quite a wide, you know, range, varying voices in the space. And you definitely have some, as you describe, and they're kind of like the image of the Bitcoin bros that you get, right, on Bitcoin Twitter and so on, that gives that sort of cultish face to it. But there's, I would say, a lot of communities that, you know, would have that kind of supportive attitude. But I also think maybe not to fixate too much on this whole volatility thing, because it's not really the point I wanted to make. And whether it's sort of Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash,
we're all in it together as far as volatility goes.
I think, yeah. Well, what El Salvador, I think, demonstrates is like there is a case for, you know, Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, these sorts of currencies coming in and helping increase financial access and also financial access with the rest of the world, right? That kind of taking out the middleman and giving more back to the citizens. And I think, that as the main goal of what we're working towards still holds. And there's just a lot of details we need to work out in the meantime.
That's right, exactly. And as always with crypto, we're going to work it out very slowly and painfully by free market experimentation with no bailouts and just make it happen. So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So Bitcoin as a humanitarian project, and this struck me that when we were talking at the meetup, that was something you said to me, like Bitcoin is just a humanitarian project, and I agree with you. That's the same way I think of it as, and it hasn't really been branded or explained that way since the beginning. The strangest part of it was that once it was sort of published and out there, the very deep down the rabbit hole people immediately were like, okay, look, it starts with, okay, this is, a new PayPal basically, or whatever. But then it just quickly escalates into, okay, can this be the new global reserve currency? And then can it improve financial access for tool? Can it rethink the way we approach governance, the way that we do cooperation at scale? All those things just like kind of come out of it. But unfortunately, just like Bitcoin has no support hotline, it also has no marketing department, or to the best extent that it does, it's also offset by the anti-marketing of everyone who doesn't understand it, or who hasn't read about all this, or is just bewildered by this financial scams and different stuff that's going on, right? So Bitcoiners have always sort of tried to explain, look, like for instance, charity is a huge part of the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency ethos, like Vitalik Buterin has donated loads to charity, and there's always been
Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah, exactly. And even going back, I'm trying to remember what was there was one way back in the day that was really known for it. But anyway, the idea is for a long time it's been a humanitarian thing, and there's sort of a contrast between Bitcoin as being this kind of free market, we're not taxing us, or like redistributing wealth, like being totally against that, and being anonymous and everything. But then on the other hand, it does actually marry up, which a lot of people don't really understand, with the Bitcoiners are not against charity, they're against forced taxation. But that doesn't mean they're against public funding. You have all cryptocurrencies are starting to figure out ways to publicly fund open source development and do stuff like that. And then on top of that, charity and financial inclusion, access to more people, giving everyone in the world the tools to be on more of a level playing field, and that is a profound revolution in human society and existence. It's just, you have to explain that along with all of the financial parts of it, and we haven't done the best job of it. So give me your take about all this.
This is like my favorite angle of Bitcoin, and I don't think we talk enough about it. I think the narrative that we hear much more, at least in the West, is this whole angle around it's a way to hedge and hedge against inflation, but what they're really saying there is protect the value of your property, your money, from being devalued or through some sort of government interference. And if you think about it, like if we're talking 5 to 10% inflation year on year, I mean, that is half your wealth eroded over the course of your lifetime, right? More. So it's not a small thing, but I think all of those, that whole idea of having a currency that is uncensorable, where you can transfer it, transact with it, send it across time and space without any kind of censorship, that the value of that is just exacerbated even more, or really amplified, when you take it to places that don't have a lot of the things that we take for granted. So if you're talking about, there are certain countries out there where their currencies are just absolutely crashing, right? And having something like Bitcoin is a lifeline out. And I mean, Ukraine is actually a perfect example right now with the war going on and the Russian ruble falling. A lot of Russians, I mean, they were honestly going to Bitcoin also to Tether, because it's got a lot more liquidity. And that is something that you couldn't have had before all of it. You could say that Bitcoin, it doesn't have to be something like Bitcoin. You can go with any cryptocurrency that lets you evade, lets you sort of get out of your fiat currency, even when there are sanctions and so on. But I think in that narrative, it's kind of like, well, if you need to put your money into something, why not take the most secure, the one that is most censor proof? So there's the point around the value itself, which I think, so many countries have encountered in recent years: hyperinflation, crashing currencies. And for them, it's like a very real deal. I think the other very interesting use case is sort of best illustrated, I guess, by example. And you've mentioned, I'm a big fan of Alex Svetski. I think he does some really good work in this space with the Human Rights Foundation to publish stories from people who are living in some of what he would call these totalitarian or oppressive regimes around the world. So countries like North Korea, examples like in Palestine, lots of cases in Africa, where you're basically giving people in these authoritarian regimes a way out, right? Because let's say you are leaving, let's say you don't like the way your government is treating you and you want to leave. It's just a very basic example. A lot of that would be near impossible if that involved, leaving behind sort of everything you have. And I guess the idea is, with some of these fiat currencies, they're really closed currencies. You can't just, take it out and convert it once you're at the border. In some cases, you can't take it with you at all because of the sort of hardship or the effort that is required to get you, from, if you're a refugee, for example, out. And he does highlight some really amazing stories of people who leave and all they have is, access to Bitcoin, and that's kind of like their lifeline. I don't know how common those narratives are, but it's definitely something that, if that became something that was really used, I mean, that's an amazing sort of escape. And then there's kind of, well, we talked about remittances earlier, right? But if someone was to send money to some, a parent in Palestine, the amount of gates and checks that would require today versus just sort of instantaneously via Bitcoin, there is a really, really big argument for the S in ESG that is really not sold well at the moment. And if it's a marketing problem, I think that is something that, if cracked, would really help people see Bitcoin not just as some sort of get rich quick scheme or, just as a simple hedge against inflation. I mean, what is inflation anyway? A lot of people, I think now this year, last year, they're talking about it more. But before that, if you had really used that as the main case for Bitcoin, I think it's that's not compelling enough. But I think in a lot of parts of the world where these problems are much more at the forefront, it is a huge deal.
Yeah, and I think, to me, it's sort of a great tragedy or irony of cryptocurrency adoption that it's the inverse side, which is maybe now slowly starting to come to prominence, of the whole sort of black markets and drug dealer kind of angle, right? Because the thing is, Bitcoin will tell you Bitcoin is for everyone, and that's a very hard thing for people to wrap their head around, to be honest, because you say, oh, look, Bitcoin's being used by all these scammers and by these drug dealers and by these illegal activity. And yeah. Well, firstly, yes, that. But the other thing is, then people say, so you just think that any, terrorists or anyone can just use Bitcoin? And it's like, yes, I said Bitcoin's for everyone. That means everyone. I'm not limiting that, and it's funny that we're in this world of people are trying to be, inclusive and accepting and all that sort of stuff. Like, Bitcoin is the ultimate form of that, or cryptocurrency generally, I guess, which is that literally it's just, maths and a communication channel, and maths doesn't care. Maths is decentralized, and we've got the internet / that even more internet, is spreading everywhere, but you theoretically don't even need the internet. There's been services, they've done Bitcoin via SMS and, any way that you can transmit information, you can do Bitcoin. And so once you combine the fact that it is for everyone and the fact that it's also neutral, I mean, there's maybe a slight asterisk on that, but to a greater or lesser degree, it is not involved with the government, controlling what is going on, saying who can do this or who can't do this. And just like I was saying about the skeptics earlier, that's another thing they don't understand, is that Bitcoin is for everyone, and that includes you when you fucking need it, because it's easy to just say, oh, I don't care about this, or this is all a scam or whatever. It's because they're only taking a one-sided view of, oh, look at these people who got wrecked out of cryptocurrency, and they're not seeing the stories like you're talking about of people who had no other option, and that was how they made it happen. It's like, you know, insurance or a lawyer. Like, you don't need Bitcoin, and you think it's pointless or stupid until you really really need it, and there's no other option, right? And we've seen that, like you say, both the Ukrainians and the Russians on both sides, they need Bitcoin. The Canadian truckers, they need Bitcoin. You know, it's just going to be story after story after story after story of, if it can be censored, it will be censored, because somebody's going to lock that down, right?
Yeah, and I know some of my you know, friends from countries like Sweden, where generally things work, and there's been no real reason in recent memory to question and be skeptical of the actions of government. I think they will say, okay, this is like very paranoid, this will never happen in the West. But then I think that is an attitude you develop that is kind of a dangerous sort of complacency, because it just means, I mean, these things always do happen, like history has shown again and again, right? It just depends where on that curve you are. Like, how far away are you from recent memory of the last time it happened? Because if the more comfortable you are, it tends to, Ray Dalio has written about this as well, it tends to just suggest you're closer to the sort of next time. But it's just like every time we've had a world war, people were not expecting it up until it happened. And then it takes another, right, it takes enough time for you to forget that these things are possible, to get really comfortable, and then you're reminded again.
Yeah. The circumstances of your complacency are what causes it to happen again. If you'd had some more paranoid people in the mix the whole time, you wouldn't be in that kind of bad situation to begin with, right?
People, yeah.
And that's what, you know, that's why I'm just mind blown that a lot of people first, okay, it is, you know, incumbent on the crypto community to do a better job of trying to explain and, you know, point out all these features. And like you said, it's definitely something that has been not done, you know, as well as it could have been. But on the other hand, it's also incumbent on the listeners to listen to what we're saying, right? And there's many people that you can talk to until you're blue in the face about all of this stuff, but they've already dug themselves in on their side of, this is pointless, or this is stupid, or there's nothing going on, or it's a scam, or whatever.
I do think there's room for something like more people, I think, are just ignorant to the side rather than completely closed to it, because it's really hard to sort of ignore the facts, right? When you tell them that Nigeria is the second largest Bitcoin market after the US, like nobody expects that. You know, and then most of the like Bitcoin activity that goes into Africa, more than 80% of that is just remittances. Really, it's about people trying to get past censorship and get past middlemen taking, you know. So I think stuff like the Oslo Freedom Forum, which will be held next week, I believe. I'm going over there. So that's run by the Human Rights Foundation, and they now have a big financial freedom pillar. I think you got to have more things like that, and you know, people coming all over the world take those stories back and then build up that narrative so that it's more dimensions than it is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Jed, do you have a point there? You kind of look like you had something you wanted to say. Nope. Okay. All right. And well, sort of related to that is something I also wanted to ask you about, which is it's kind of related, but it's also kind of tangential, which is the mental health aspect of it. And you, had a very interesting take that you said to me when we were talking about this the other day, that, you know, Bitcoin had been changing people's lives who were maybe not in this situation of, okay, complete desperation as to, you know, being able to send money internationally, but they were in a sort of semi-related camp, which is maybe like financially, you know, they were living in a society where everything was okay, but they had other problems, right? They had problems with, like, you know, drug addiction or something like that. And the ethos and the incentives of Bitcoin are such that it comes sort of packaged up with all these ideals about, they always talk about low time preference or high time preference. I can't remember which. I guess high time preference is short-term thinking. Low time preference.
You want low time preference.
Yeah. You know, the Bitcoin BTC community focus on that a bit more, but it is inbuilt into, you know, crypto as a whole, or the idea of limited supply currencies and so on and so forth, that you will be rewarded in the future. And once you sort of pair that with the ideas about non-custodial, be your own bank and so on, if you combine the fact with thinking in the long term as well as taking responsibility for yourself, that's essentially just the message of be an adult, basically. But maybe we live in a society or at a time where that some of that stuff has slipped away, like you were saying, and we need a reminder to get, like, does anybody really think that the generation that lived through the world wars, if crypto had come out when they were 18 years old, that they would have been having as many problems with the bank ripped off? Probably not. I would sort of guess they were already
problems, probably.
they have bigger problems. But the point I'm trying to make is that people who are very self-reliant and willing to take responsibility and be, responsible for their own, that's why Bitcoin is also big in like, these off-grid type of, communities and self-sustaining communities and stuff like that, because people can see, look, it's on me to look after myself, and that message was helping people who needed that for one reason or another.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this topic. I work in the mental health space. I have a company in the mental health space, and I've been trying to think about the parallels between these two areas that I'm very, both of them very passionate about, but in different ways. I think the one you touch on is kind of one of the obvious ones for sure, where this self-custody, figuring out how do I stop relying on the state or, on banks, and that mindset shift. There are definitely some parallels between that and what, in most modern, some of the most commonly used evidence-based therapies, it's all around personal responsibility as one of the key components, right? You have to make that mindset shift into, actually, I'm responsible for sort of how I feel, how I respond to the events around me. So there is something there. I think the narrative goes deeper though with Bitcoin, and the thing that I find the most interesting, especially going to all these conferences and being surrounded by Bitcoiners, and people have told me, Bitcoin has cured me of addiction, of mental health issues, of, just a crisis of meaning, is the community. Actually, it's this whole sense of, maybe at some point, these people back in, I guess, 2011, 2013, when it was still just me in my bedroom, isolated, maybe in contact with some others on the internet, but you didn't have the sense of being surrounded by people who shared the same kind of values, the same kind of vision for what the world is. And suddenly kind of finding that tribe is a very powerful thing. So there's definitely something within the community of Bitcoin that I think is really mostly positive, but there's also sometimes, the sense of, okay, like people might come for whatever, but they stay for the community, and they end up not necessarily like fully agreeing with everything that is said and done in the community, but they want to be a part of it, right? And that is where it gets into, I guess we'll talk about later, some of the sort of like similarities with cultish type behavior that I'm not saying that Bitcoin is definitely a cult, but there are definitely moments where it feels that way. So there's the community aspect, and then I think it's the purpose aspect, right? Just feeling like, okay, there's this, the whole saying Bitcoin is hope, that for a lot of these people, maybe they lived in a place where, they weren't really happy with the way society was set up, but they didn't know what could be done. And Bitcoin provides an alternative. It provides a vision that is a little bit, sometimes it feels so far away because it implies so many things have to change for us to get there. But it is this sort of hope, Bitcoin fixes this, all of these sorts of statements, whether true or not, it gives people a sense of something to strive towards. And I think that element of purpose and feeling like you're a part of something bigger than yourself is really, really important to just well-being in general, right? Any science of well-being will tell you need those fundamental elements. You need personal responsibility. You need community connection, and you need purpose. You need to feel like your life is worth more than just living to the next paycheck.
Yeah, no, very, very well said. And it's funny because it like many things, it sort of traces its way back to the origins, that it is an idealistic bid for freedom, essentially. And that whole community aspect of it being about voluntarism, right? And the thing about a community is that fundamentally you can only join a community voluntarily. Like, okay, for instance, you might be born in a particular nation, you might be a citizen of that nation, but you maybe don't feel a part of that nation or a part of the community, whatever is said on paper, if you in yourself don't feel like I'm bought into this project or this nation or anything else, whether it's your local sports team or it's your friend circle, or it's an event you attended, or it's a music subgenre, or it could be anything, right? And crypto is a very new aspect of that. And like I talked about before, with the sort of tribalism elements to it, it does double down, for better and for worse, on that thing of you're all on the same team. And literally by buying Bitcoin, you're putting your money where your mouth is. We're all going to sink or swim together at the end of the day, right? And so those very strong incentives make it such that you're not messing around. Like you got to buy in a bit, emotionally at a certain point too. Even once your finances get to a certain extent, then probably
exactly
you're in for real.
You have real skin in the game.
Exactly.
And I mean, I hear people talk about going to these conferences, like Miami a couple of weeks ago, and while you're there, it's like, oh my god, I found my people. These people get me. You speak the same language, and then they go back home and they feel like, god, like you're really missing that energy again. And now your friends and family, they look at you like you're crazy when you talk about things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's try and hit on some of that. I just want to quickly shout out. So Eat BCH is the charity I've got on the slide. They do meals for kids in Venezuela and South Sudan. They're a big part of the BCH community. And if anybody's feeling charitable, check them out, because it's pretty easy to just send someone a couple bucks and do your good part in the world. But okay, let's talk about the Remnant. Let's talk about Alex Svetski. So for those who don't know, and I was only sort of vaguely aware of any of this before I talk to you, so I got to credit you for introducing me this idea. There's this guy who's somewhat prominent, I guess, in the Bitcoin BTC community. His name's Alex Svetski, and he has this idea about the Remnant, which is actually not his idea, and he would say that it's more he's promulgating, he's explaining this idea. He's a prophet in some sense of he read this article which was called Isaiah's Job, and it's basically this essay from the 1800s, which was about the biblical story, which is much older, of Isaiah being told by God, you've got to go and preach, Christianity, I guess it was in the original version. And the point was that God said, look, it's not going to work. People are not going to flood in and think, great, you're explaining to me about Christianity and about the word and all that, religious stuff. Like, you're not going to get much results out of this, but this is the mission. Go and do it anyway. And so the question is, well, what's the point? If it's not going to work and it's not, people are not going to respond, why should I do it? And the answer was, well, you're not really going to see the impact, but the people who need to hear that message will hear that message. And it won't be that many of them, but it will be the ones who are on the right frequency, or they're at the right point in their life, or whatever. And so by just changing the opinion of a small minority, that will then kind of ripple out, and eventually the masses, so-called, just the majority, they will kind of come along for the ride. And so Alex Svetski was like, well, this is a great idea. I love this. And he's basically just repackaged it with a lot of sort of Bitcoin language around it, and started explaining that same idea to the Bitcoin community, that why are we trying to be mainstream? It should be the other way around. We should try and be a disciplined, kind of opinionated minority, and that everybody else will get on board, not when they want to or when they are curious or something, but when they have to. What I was sort of saying before about the crypto skeptic, once nobody else in your city will trade with you except in Bitcoin, there's no arguing with at that point. That's kind of his idea. And I listened to a bunch of it. His explanation, I've got linked on the slide. There's one called "Bitcoin is the Remnant, the Masses Don't Matter." Alex Svetski Twitter Spaces, which people can look at, is kind of the, I don't know, I guess the authoritative, summary of it or whatever. Which is, yeah, it's actually pretty great. I do recommend it to everyone, and he's right. I think in the sense that. Not in the sense that you should try and push away people, or that you should try and think you're part of some enlightened class, which is another big difference between the, of the laser eyes Bitcoin crowd. They've sort of gone a bit off their rocker there. But the idea is similar to Nassim Taleb has this idea of the intolerant minority strategy, which is that you don't need to convince 100% of people to convince 100% of people. Actually, you only need to convince a small amount of people who won't budge on it, right? So if you're in a family of 4 and one person is a vegetarian, almost certainly everyone in the room is going to eat vegetarian most of the time. Why? Because it's easier to accommodate the one person who has a fixed belief and won't bend to sort of peer pressure than to, do 2 meals, or for the same reason, halal restrictions and things around the world. And that kind of scales up, right? So if you have one person in one family who's vegetarian, then probably that family eats vegetarian. And then when that family goes to a meeting of families, maybe the whole event is vegetarian just to cater to this one guy. It does break down at a certain scale, right? But the general idea is that or if 9 people in a room, speak German and English, and one person only speaks English, well, the Germans will probably speak English just to be inclusive of that one person. So you can sort of have a massively outsized effect by a small core of people who just won't budge. And he's right. That's a core part of both the BTC and the BCH mentality, So yeah, I just wanted to get your take on this, especially because, like you said, you told me that you went to Bitcoin 2022 and it did feel a bit cult-like.
Yeah, definitely. And I met Svetski as well. So
yeah, well, there you go. You can give us the review of the man, the myth, the legend himself, the proper.
I'm going to separate himself from some of his writings and his opinions, which I think are intentionally controversial. And I think he says himself, right? He's not really here to try and pander to the masses. That's part of his message. There are bits of it which I think is like, okay, no, there's a fair point here. This is just sort of the way the world works. That as Nassim Taleb, as you referenced in here, in his writing, he mentions that you really only need about 3 to 4% of the population who vehemently stick to an idea to get on board before the masses will eventually sort of almost by default come on. And sort of related to that is this idea that the masses, or the majority, like if you don't change the world by catering to everybody, it creates inertia almost by default, right? The masses will slow things down. And so you do need that segment of the population that is able to, and I think the way he divides it up, he has a whole kind of model of, there's the 20% in the Pareto sort of distribution that creates 80% of the impact. But then of the 20%, there's 20% of them. And then of them, there's the 20%. And they're like the ones that really move the needle. And I mean, there's something in here as well, which is part of, so his whole thing, right? He calls himself a toxic maximalist. It's also about, I think anyway, putting a stake in the ground so strong that you really don't let that message be diluted. And so some of it is going to be controversial because you're not, playing nice with everybody. You're making that point. And it's, I think when I have the discussion with maximalists and bring them, there's this critique that you're too exclusionary. There's it's like Bitcoin or shit coins, right? There's nothing else. But I think part of the reason they anchor so strongly on that message is because you do have things happening all the time, like Luna. And they've lived through enough of those cycles to say there needs to be a strong message, and that's what we stand for. Like, obviously there are nuances and so on, but when we're making a stake in the ground, we need to make that strong, because there's going to be that's what it takes in order to move the needle. So I think that part makes perfect sense. The part that is okay, so around just we don't care about mass adoption. I think that I don't agree with, of course, because if you want the value of Bitcoin to be somewhat equally distributed, just going back to the humanitarian promise that we talked about, I mean, then it makes no sense, right? If we're saying it's a different question as Does everyone need to come on the ride in order for Bitcoin to succeed and to survive? No. But does everyone need to come on the ride in order for them to actually benefit from Bitcoin? Well, yes, like by default, you need that. So it's kind of a question of, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about, giving this as a tool for freedom, right? That it was sort of set up and has the promise to be? Then I think, you need to talk about adoption. So to me, it's like, it's not either or. On the cult topic, I definitely thought Bitcoin was a cult when I went to El Salvador, and at President Bukele's event, there was a moment where the entire crowd was actually just chanting, Bitcoin. And it was like, okay, well, there's something here, right, where everybody is so hyped up about this. And I think in a way that is beautiful. The only times that it concerns me is when you get too much of this, almost, it sounds like statements from, the party line, where it's just designed to kind of shut down conversation. And this happens sometimes, when you ask someone a question that maybe challenges an idea around what maximalists believe. And the response, I have to say, the response often is a patient one, where they explain their perspective. But then you also get the people, on Twitter that just respond with the NGMI and, sort of different ways to shut that door. And I think that's a bit intellectually disingenuous, because you're really not, you're not coming to this with a sort of perspective of being curious, of allowing challenge. You're really also not allowing the conversation to go beyond, one level deep, right? Because some of their defenses that I've heard, or rather some of the arguments, sometimes do seem one layer deep, and then you start asking questions and then it gets a little bit too defensive. So there are elements there where I think it's just, there is a very strong belief system, there's a strong language, there's a very strong kind of meme culture around everything, that it feels like when you are a Bitcoiner versus, some of the normies, there is a distinction, right? And that's of course prevalent in lots of, not just cults, it exists all over, where people have a strong sense of identity. But I think it's only when you start, shutting down any challenge. And I guess you guys would know, having just sort of tried to bring out some of the nuances with Bitcoin Cash, like you've obviously come across this a lot as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly, preaching to the choir, because I find it very ironic, honestly, that Alex Svetski has this idea, like you're saying, about the like the Russian doll of Pareto principles, which is absolutely correct. You have 20% of the 80%, and you have 20% of that 80%. And basically, if you take that idea to its conclusion, you essentially come down to like Satoshi, which is another thing that a lot of people don't understand. There was a time when one person out of billions believed that Bitcoin was a thing, and it was just Satoshi, and he launched it, and then Hal Finney was like, yeah, maybe this is interesting, right? And then it went there. So if you take that as your metric for success, everybody's always like, Bitcoin's dying, blah blah blah, like whatever. You just, what planet are you living on? If you rewind yesterday, there was less people that believed in crypto than today. I don't know how much more that needle has shifted, but people are basically on a one-way journey, and there's more of them every day, right? And so then, let alone if you go back 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, people that are worried about crypto dying now, like, have no idea about the scale of human capital in terms of brain space, in terms of financial incentives, all that is bought into, like, is going to make this ship fly like hell or high water kind of thing. Versus back in the early days, right? And the longer you're in crypto, the more you slowly see that transition happen, and you get this idea, right? So I find it fascinating that he understands that a resilient minority is ultimately going to win out in the end, but then he doesn't understand, or at least he hasn't, thought it through, or maybe it hasn't really occurred to him, that Bitcoiners are not necessarily the most resilient minority. I would say they're up there, but obviously to me, the Bitcoin Cash community is leagues ahead. They're in a new class, like in terms of resilience, like we mentioned before. Like the Bitcoin Cash community has been through 3 whole forks where they cut out a section of the community and said, just get lost, like you guys don't get it, or like we're willing to take the loss of that network effect and that brand and that momentum and everything like that, because we're low time preference and we're thinking in the biggest vision, like this has got to work decentralized and so on and so forth, right? So I think it's very interesting that he will dismiss competitors, or maybe even something like Ethereum could even be the same case, which is I don't know that he has the strongest arguments or whatever around. You can say that the smallest minority or the strongest minority will win, and that scale is not really a factor so much. But then he hasn't, I don't think, done the work to look into, well, obviously Bitcoiners are not necessarily the strongest minority because there's thousands of cryptocurrencies. So there's little minorities in all those communities that are doing the same thing. We all believe in this, different thing. And maybe there will come a point at which, a lot of the smaller communities are going to get kind of mopped up because people will actually be trading crypto. But unless people are actually trading, and like we talked about the network effect of money, if you have 10,000 hodlers versus 10,000 people that earn and spend in crypto, the 10,000 that earn and spend are going to wipe the floor with the others in terms of how strong their network effect is and how much it incentivizes new people to join the network and so forth. And it might even be the case that 100 people earning and spending Bitcoin is better than 10,000 hodlers. And that was the whole reason that the BTC and BCH community split in the first place, which was that the BCH community was like, I don't, as painful as it's going to be, we have to, like you're saying, we have to put a fork, a line in the sand and say, look, this can't go any further, because they'd already been through fees going from 0.01 cent and everybody just spending it and adopting merchants and building an economy to, the fees were $1 or $2 and they were on the rise, and the real commerce was dying away. And so that, to me, that's kind of the
sorry to interrupt, but
go on.
Roughly, the community size, just so I have a bearing here, like what is the relative size between Bitcoin cashes and people Bitcoins?
This is the $1 million question, isn't it? Because there is no sort of objective metric in that sense. So if you look back at the timeline at when the block size was started, Bitcoin Cash, I would estimate, was about 90% of the community or more, maybe 95%. And by the time
hash power said 90%. So I mean,
well, that's not exactly a metric of the community, but it's of people who had the big money, obviously. But I would say like it was like 90 or 95% of the community were Bitcoin Cash, or they were big blockers at the time, basically. But then by the time it finished 2 years later, they were, maybe 20% or something. And the difference was that you had this obviously growing curve of total Bitcoiners the whole time, but the Bitcoin Cash community basically got completely censored and banned out of all the discussion. So all the new people that were coming in, they were only hearing one side of the argument. So the Bitcoin Cash side, which was initially the majority, was getting slammed out of there. And, Thamos said, if 90% of Bitcoin users disagree with me, then instead of changing the mods, they should all fuck off. And he actually meant that. There was 90% of people that were like, at the very least, we need to open the discussion, even whether of what side they were on. They were at least in favor of, hearing both sides of the argument. But that didn't get heard, and eventually it turned into the nuclear option, which was we're going to split the community and do it our own kind of way. But now, anyway, go on.
I was just going to say, because the reason I asked is also to get a sense of, because it sounds like kind of what you're saying is the community around Bitcoin Cash is actually a lot more, they're more, in a way, like they're even more purist, right? They're the way they stick to, let's just call it the ideology, because we're talking about cults here, is even more intense than with the broader Bitcoin crowd, because you have a lot of people in the Bitcoin crowd that really actually maybe they just got in, in the recent years, they actually don't know that much about it, and every time the price crashes, they're probably coming out of the market. So you have a lot more people in that space there that are not, they don't identify with the ideology, they don't know that much about it at all, right? Maybe they're just institutional investors who want to have a bit of exposure. And so, and I wonder if that actually, I mean, I asked about the size because in a way it gives you a sense of what stages are the two on the journey, because if Bitcoin Cash progresses, at some point, in order to get to the scale that Bitcoin has, you will almost by default need to bring on board these less ideologically pure people, because you're just not going to find them out there in the world. So I think, it's an interesting idea, and I can understand why that is the case, because, these are the people that have stuck it through 3 forks. They're really, really committed. But if you want to grow that community, you're going to have to dilute, right, the types of people that come through.
but we will be ready for it. I was a merchant accepting BTC when we forked. No one was using it because it was too expensive. Like, and we already have a plan for, well, I mean, it's not set in stone, obviously. There's this whole chip process, but there's already talk about a dynamic adjustable block size limit. And yeah, I think, like, I was in BTC, and I feel like I completely got excluded, and I was like, okay, fine by me, fuck you guys. We literally have this thing that works better for me right now. I don't know why. Yeah, like I've mentioned this on the podcast before. Between BTC and Ethereum, I've completely, like, they're dead to me because they've priced out so many people.
But I guess as far as the ideological sort of purity and that element of it goes, it's kind of the remnant again, which is, of course, as the BCH community grows. So let's say the price ratio right now is 1 to 146. Is there actually 146 times as many holders of BTC as BCH? Maybe or maybe not. I would say probably not. It's maybe it's like 60 to 1 or even 40 to 1 or something like that. But the key point is that the vast majority of the people who hold BTC are not like Alex Svetski and are gonna, ride or die with the ship. If they see the winds blowing to Ethereum or to Bitcoin Cash or to Solana or whatever, they'll sell their coins and jump on that train, right? So what really matters is the kind of core that then everything else is kind of built around. So although the BCH community is much smaller by absolute numbers, in terms of ride or die people, the difference probably isn't 40 to 1. It might be 5 to 1 or something like that. The advantage is much smaller. And interestingly, those Bitcoiners who are ride or die, they spend their whole time posting that graph of the price chart of BTC to PCH, and they take it to mean, haha, look how poorly the market, it's over, we've won, the market has spoken. But that's not the remnant. If they were thinking of the remnant, they would think, holy shit, these guys have been massacred and they're still here. They would take it as a sign of strength, not a sign of, you're inevitably going to zero. So there's just quite an irony in that. And of course, as the network grows and expands, there will be less and less people who are ideologically bought into all this. But there's two countervailing factors. One is that if the network works for them, then they're already on board, whether they know it or not. If they're using it to transact, they've made their choice. They're paying the fees to the BCH miners, and we're winning by default, whether or not they know all these 100 other elements to it. And the second thing is that we can educate more people, and there's not like a hard cap. Like, we can create more people. That's the whole reason there is this podcast, that there was that Who Killed Bitcoin documentary, that there's FAQs on my site, that blah 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 blah. I'm using me sort of as an example, but the community as a whole is kind of doing the work to spread and explain that message. And ironically, the thing about BCH is that you cannot choose it by mistake. The BTC people will say, haha, we've got the brand, so you guys are done. But it's another remnant idea. If you're in Bitcoin Cash, you can explain what is BTC, what is BCH, and why is BCH better. There's no way around it. But 99% of BTC people they say Bcash is a scam, or they don't know anything. They don't know the history. They don't know what happened. They don't know why it exists. They don't know about it at all. So they've just chosen Bitcoin BTC because it was the biggest. They didn't make a conscious choice. So that means on average the Bitcoin Cash adopters are and that scales as well too. The bigger the community gets, the bigger the ability to spread that education gets as well too. So I don't know. Anyway, that's a
that's a really interesting. Yeah. No, you're right. I wasn't expecting the angle, but I like it actually. I'm curious. I mean, a bit of maybe a tangent, but who are you targeting? When you're educating, because it's obviously not the Bitcoiners that you're trying to convert over to Bitcoin Cash. Is it just people?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we'll take anyone who will listen. I think the majority of the most laser eye Bitcoiners are a little bit of a lost cause. They're harder to convince or to explain, and that's very cult-like again than somebody who has no preconceptions about it, just because they've dug in on so many things. And like I said, they're the least amenable to understanding. Like, so imagine you started out with 0% knowledge of Bitcoin and you're now at 50%, but they think they're at 100%. And so it's kind of like, look, a lot of this is right, and I don't disagree with you, and it all fits with exactly what you're thinking. but there's a few things you've got to unlearn. Sometimes somebody unlearning things is harder than, learning it for the first time. And that's why it's very crucial that BCH has been getting, adoption. And I've had loads of people on the show, more than I expected, actually, who are more recently into the community, who are, maybe like you, they joined in the last year, the last 2 years, the last 3 years, and they know about the fork and the history and all that. But it's not like me. I'm on this side, because I've been fighting that battle forever. But for them, they learned, okay, these are the options, and they chose BCH. And so I think we're going to end up onboarding a lot more people in these scenarios like St. Kitts or whatever, where people are using it and they experience it first as a tangible economy, that they see somebody spending Bitcoin or somebody earning Bitcoin, or they see everyone in their community starting to use it, or maybe use it for remittances or whatever. And they start from that pragmatic understanding, and the theory then gets filled in later. I sometimes say like Bitcoin BTC got the brand and Bitcoin BCH got the vision. We got all those ideas about a cash economy and so on and so forth. I watched the other day a little bit of Nick Carter, I think his name is. He was on Lex Fridman podcast, and the first thing he does is he gives him his little one dime, and he says, look, this is a physical manifestation of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin should be like cash. And he literally says that, even though Bitcoin is like cash. Bitcoin is electronic cash. That was the title of the white paper, and the only reason he needs an open dime to say to Lex Fridman, look, we're making this cool transaction, is because he can't just whip it out and send it to him and say it's on chain, it's non-custodial cash. I mean, that's not to say that those physical manifestations of crypto are also cool and interesting and stuff like that, but just the so many things come from the premise, and once you divert the premise off to digital gold or whatever, there's just a million and one things that are impacted, and like the volatility stuff that we were discussing about before, and like this, like privacy, the less people there are transacting on chain, the more easy it is to do chain analytics, for instance. Like there's so many different things that are built into the idea, which you divert a little bit. So who's the message going to? Well, to you, hopefully, and also to the listeners and to the remnant, to whoever chooses to listen, whatever stage they might be. I don't know.
If I can go kind of full circle with my idea a little bit, I think you hit a couple points that I was missing, Jeremy, where it was like, I think I'm ideologically in love with the premise of Bitcoin, right? And I didn't realize it until like years later reading Samuel Konkin, like I'm definitely through and through an agorist. And my interest primarily comes from taking the power away from centralized entities with no accountability, and especially those that have monopoly on violence. Like that's terrifying. So being in a situation where I'm priced out of being able to say, I don't want to be a part of this system, and this system doesn't want me, and this one is the exact same as this one historically, but allows everyone to use it, and they're preparing for more users on this, on layer one, on the most valuable layer. I think that was the encouraging part. So we have the ideologues, and I know I'm not the only one. Like, Roger was called Bitcoin Jesus, and now he's Bitcoin Judas, because all of a sudden he's like, well, guys, this one seems more usable to me.
He's still Bitcoin Jesus. He just got crucified. That's it.
Exactly. And then when like the people that are just in it for fiat gains or just a quick transaction or whatever, just want to experiment, they don't care the name or the brand of the chain. They just want something that works, and we're ready for that.
All right, cool. Well, that might be it for Alex Svetski today. So we've been going 2 hours. We're just coming into the final few little segments of the show. Then we've got community comment of the week that I do. It's literally not always a Bitcoin Cash person. Often it is, but sometimes I take the view that the community is everyone in the world, or will be eventually. So especially if you crypto adjacent people sometimes get in there. This one comes from Kobe Crypto Cabane, who's this sort of well-known crypto tweeter and whatever. I'm personally a bit middling on a lot of his opinions, but anyway, he has a lot of good takes sometimes, and he is an OG crypto person. So anyway, he said on Twitter this week, in light of the UST Luna fiasco, so that's where it all ties in. He said, "Rising from the dead once is a fun magic trick, but but continually rising from the dead can make people believers. Maybe we die and go to zero forever, and it was all a symptom of broken economic policy. But every time we don't, believers become more resilient. And then he also replied to that with, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Stand a little taller. Doesn't mean I'm lonely when I'm alone, or something. So that's a quote from, what's her name? It's Stronger by Kelly Clarkson is the song. So he's making a bit of a joke out of it there too. But the premise is solid, and it ties into the Luna fiasco, and it ties into the Remnant ideas and stuff. There's that site, bitcoinobituaries.com, and now it just has like thousands of articles of Bitcoin is dead, Bitcoin is gone, Bitcoin is over. It's all crashed, and it's like 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. And it just the list goes on and on and on of just hundreds of people saying it's over and you're finished. And what people don't understand is that crypto does have these hype cycles and crashes, and people get wrecked and sell out, and all the problems that happen with Luna or anything else. But I'm sure out of all the people who lost money in Luna, a lot of them will still be there in crypto. They're still coming back. They're still going to research, learn their lessons, and start buying into another crypto, right? Because, you just can't deny something that you've said is dead over and over and over, whether it's Bitcoiners telling BCHs that it's finished, or whether it's fiat people telling, or no coiners telling crypto people that it's over. The fact that they're still telling you it's over means it isn't over. And I just really thought that just nailed it. Any thoughts on any of that? Do you know Crypto Kobe, for instance? Do you follow his stuff?
I don't, but I absolutely resonate with the quote. I think that's I was told that from the very beginning, right? You're gonna experience these cycles, and every time it doesn't go to zero. There's a lesson to take from that, and the kind of you're ready for it the next time as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Experience teaches harshly, but it teaches best, as they say. All right. Then we got meme of the week. This one I liked as well too. This is from @icebergy on Twitter. So this seems like a bit of a setup, but I don't know how they did it. So the tweet is choose your fighter, and there's two photos that are very similar. So on the left is Richard Hart, who is this known, crypto influencer type of guy, famously of his very scammy Hex and Pulse chains. And it's him with some fancy car in this, what do you call it? Like a tartan patterned brown, suit and sunglasses, leaning on this expensive car. And he's a bit of a pudgy guy as well too. And then on the right hand side, you have the second picture, which is BitBoy Crypto, who is another sort of crypto influencer, educational channel / maybe a bit less scammy than Richard Hart, but kind of actually very similar in a lot of ways. And he's also this kind of been coordinated. Surely somebody has just found these two photos. He's in a green tartan pattern suit, sitting on his Lamborghini with his sunglasses on, and I just found this so funny because it just wraps up so much of crypto in one picture. It's are people choosing what coins they like, or are they just choosing who to believe in? And it's just funny that both of these guys would think they've got the flashy car, the sunglasses, I'm so cool, but they're a bit overweight, and these guys would maybe be paperweight in a boxing ring. So it's just kind of ironic that the tweet choose your fighter, I don't know, it made me laugh. What did you make of this, and do you follow or are interested in the ideas of either Richard Hart or BitBoy, Jenny?
Gosh, I'm sorry, I don't. Oh no.
Well, that says it all right there. That's part of it. That's part of what you're saying about the humanitarian aspect of Bitcoin and all this stuff. It's very, very divorced from this huge segment of the market, and why people are confused about why cryptos A, so volatile, and B, got so much hype and confusion in the public market, is because this is what crypto is to a massive amount of people. People who are either slightly into crypto or who are not into crypto, but they know what it is, right? This is the face of what they're seeing, and that's, of
course, yeah. If you go onto Bitcoin Twitter, it's a whole other universe.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, where the key points about, conferences and meetups and stuff, I think that is super important, because they're just a breeding ground for when it's just one-on-one, like when we met, it's just one-on-one. Suddenly the signal to noise ratio just like skyrockets versus anything else. And it's
100%.
It's a slow, version of people learning those things, in those one-to-one conversations. But like all things with decentralization, it scales very, very well. So the bigger crypto gets, the bigger and the faster that education spreads, which is great to see. Okay, so second last slide then is message to the community. So every guest on this show gets a chance to talk to the Bitcoin Cash community. Again, interpreted as loosely as you like. The diehards, the current set, the future set, or everyone in the world who will eventually adopt Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. What do you think we need to hear?
So I think we talked a lot about the humanitarian aspects of this. I think I won't beat that drum more, but I would say, if we're thinking about how do we get this to take off, how do we give it even more momentum? It sounded like a lot of the projects around Bitcoin Cash is around just getting this economy in practice, pay with it, go make it happen in your community. So I sent someone sats for the first time quite recently, actually. Just download a wallet of Satoshi and send them some sats and make them realize how easy it is, that this is, in fact, something that is instantaneous, that they can download, set it up within minutes. So I think do more of that, like live the story. And I'm sure most of the community on here probably is already doing that. But, Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, whatever your affiliation, put it into practice.
Yeah, it never hurts to hear that. Just every single day, it's just a battle of miles won by inches. Just every one little bit adds up. And yeah, people struggle to understand. Again, it comes back to that personal responsibility and all those things. Like people just think that crypto or Bitcoin or the network or whatever, it's just can the devs fix this? Like, no, you can fix this. You're there to fix Bitcoin. It's up to you,
Exactly. Yeah, be the remnant.
Yeah, be the remnant. Exactly. Preach to the masses, and the ones who need to hear it will hear it. Shout out to Alex Svetski and Isaiah's job as well. All right, cool. Well, that will do it for the show then. As always, thank you very much to the donators. I love to see it. More of those on-chain transactions, start guide, FAQ links, all that stuff is at bitcoincashpodcast.com. Also, there's links to all the social media and stuff, but you can also check out Odyssey, Rumble, and BitChute, especially because this week or last week, whenever it was, Bankless, who is one of the Bitcoin biggest crypto channels, they got banned off YouTube with no explanation, and they did get their channel back. But the same thing has happened to Pomp. The same thing happens to everyone in crypto. Eventually, the censors come for you, and it's going to happen to me at some point, given a long enough time scale. So I'm already trying to kind of diversify. Shout out to Ricky, my one Patreon, and shout outs for the show. Jenny, where can people find you if you put out any public content, and or who needs some recognition in the world? Who do you want to send some love to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not really putting much out there. I think definitely look at Alex Gladstein's writings. He's got a lot of great articles up, and also check out the Oslo Freedom Forum. If you have nothing to do next weekend, go down to Oslo and be on the ground and go meet some people and hear what's happening.
Hell yeah, good shout out. Jet, anyone you want to shout out this week? All right, and I'm just going to shout out everyone who is on the BCH upgrade stream. Just seriously, go check that out. It's Emergent Reasons had a really good comment afterwards where he said, look, there was a crazy diversity of people. You had the politicians, you had the business people, you had the devs, you had the financial stuff. Just like everybody's just collaborating and pushing as a team, and it's great to see. So
I do have one message.
Okay, get in there.
If it gets time for us to do the Bitcoin Cash Conference in St. Kitts, and Canada hasn't laxed up its travel restrictions yet, I'm going to need someone to get me a private flight out of here because I'm going to that conference. We need to make things happen. So this is my one message to the community, please.
We'll see what we can do to sort you out, but hopefully Canada gets its act together in the next 6 months. Or surely the dam is going to break. I was wondering about that today. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. We'll do a separate episode on that. We already have done a separate episode on the disasters in Canada. All right, that'll do it for the show. Thanks everyone for watching, and until next time.
The greatest story the world has ever known. The rise and rise of Bitcoin. 2022.
A single chance for the world, a single moment in time. Bankers captures all, our cryptocurrency flies. Gets to decide, Phoenix fly from the flame. Bitcoin BCH, forever changing the game.
An underdog story everyone trying to deny. Bitcoin revolution, crypto trade.